They have no navy. It's been knocked out. President Donald Trump on March 3rd, after a dramatic 48 hours that reportedly crippled Iran's naval fleet. What unfolded during those 2 days shocked military analysts around the world. Bombs and cruise missiles rained down on Iranian naval assets, leaving shipyards burning, command centers destroyed, and what remained of Iran's naval presence in the Gulf of Oman effectively wiped out. According to USATSA's military sources, the conflict escalated after Iran responded to earlier American and Israeli strikes on its military infrastructure by launching attacks on several U.S. bases across the region. The United States quickly responded with a devastating counter-operation that focused heavily on neutralizing Iran's naval capabilities. What happened next unfolded at incredible speed. Within just 2 days, U.S. forces unleashed a massive wave of precision strikes targeting Iranian warships, naval bases, and command facilities. Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from U.S. destroyers and submarines flew hundreds of miles across the region, striking Iranian naval targets before many of them even had time to react. The results were devastating. According to reports from USSA, Central Command, Iran lost at least 11 warships in the Gulf of Oman alone. Several attack submarines were also destroyed or disabled. Satellite images soon began circulating online, showing massive smoke clouds rising from naval facilities and docks, where Iranian vessels had been stationed just days earlier. CENTCOM summed up the situation in a dramatic statement posted online. 2 days ago, the Iranian regime had 11 ships in the Gulf of Oman. Today they have 0. For decades, Iran had used its navy to harass international shipping routes in the region, especially around the strategically critical Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz. The United States had long warned that such actions threatened global trade and, by Cordian, energy security. Now, according to U.S. patented officials, those days may be over. Satellite photographs have begun to reveal the full scale of the destruction. One of the most significant losses appears to be the Iris Makran, a massive forward-based ship that had once been an oil tanker before being converted into a military support vessel. The Makran was capable of carrying helicopters, drones, and special operations equipment. With a displacement of around 120,000 tons, it was one of the largest naval vessels operating in the Middle East. Satellite imagery now shows fires burning across its deck and thick smoke rising from its central structure. Another major loss appears to be a Jamaran-class corvette stationed at the Chabahar naval facility. These ships were armed with anti-ship missiles, torpedoes, and air defense systems, making them a key part of Iran's naval strategy. But the biggest blow may have come with the destruction of the Iris Shahid Bagheri, often described as Iran's closest equivalent to an aircraft carrier. The vessel had been converted from a commercial ship into a drone-launching platform capable of carrying helicopters and unmanned aircraft. It played a central role in Iran's strategy of projecting drone power across the region. Now, that capability appears to have been eliminated. Military analysts say the speed and effectiveness of the American strikes came down to a single factor: strategy. For years, Iran had prepared for a direct naval confrontation with the United States. Its doctrine focused on swarm tactics, using fast attack boats, submarines, and coastal missile batteries to overwhelm larger American warships in narrow waterways like the Strait of Hormuz. But the battle Iran expected never happened. Instead of sailing directly into Iranian waters, the United States launched long-range cruise missiles from hundreds of miles away. Tomahawk missiles with ranges exceeding 1,500 kilometers struck Iranian naval targets before Iran's ships could even leave port. In other words, Iran had prepared for a close-range naval fight. What it received was a long-range precision bombardment. One by one, Iranian ships were hit by missiles launched from U.S. destroyers and submarines positioned far outside Iran's engagement range. Many of the vessels were struck while still docked at their naval bases. Once the initial wave of cruise missile strikes had crippled the fleet, U.S. aircraft reportedly moved in for precision follow-up attacks. F-35 stealth fighters delivered guided bombs against remaining naval infrastructure, ensuring that damaged vessels could not be repaired or redeployed. Military analysts described the operation as less of a naval battle and more of a systematic demolition of Iran's fleet. But beyond the immediate military impact, the operation may have had a much larger strategic objective. One of the key flashpoints in the conflict has been the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping routes in the world. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow waterway. Iran has long threatened to close the strait during times of conflict, using naval forces, mines, and missile attacks to disrupt global shipping. In recent days, Iranian officials once again warned that they could block the strait and attack oil tankers passing through it, but maintaining control over such a critical choke point requires a functioning navy. By destroying Iran's naval fleet in the Gulf of Oman, the United States may have eliminated the main force capable of enforcing such a blockade. Energy markets around the world are watching closely. Oil prices have already shown signs of volatility as shipping companies weigh the risks of sending vessels through the region. Insurance costs for ships traveling through the Strait of Hormuz have surged dramatically. Some analysts believe Iran may still attempt to disrupt shipping using smaller boats, mines, or drone attacks. But without larger naval vessels to coordinate operations, those efforts may be far less effective. Despite the devastating losses, Iranian officials have attempted to project confidence. State media has reported missile launches and drone attacks against U.S. bases and regional targets. Iranian leaders have also claimed that hundreds of missiles and drones have been launched against enemy positions. However, independent analysts say the scale of Iran's response appears significantly smaller than previous retaliatory operations. For many observers, the events of the past 48 hours represent a turning point in the conflict. Iran spent decades building a naval doctrine designed specifically to counter the United States. Yet that doctrine failed to anticipate the modern warfare tactics that were used against it. In just 2 days, a fleet that took decades to assemble was largely destroyed. And according to several American officials, the campaign may not be over. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned that the strikes so far have only addressed what the United States described as an imminent threat. The hardest hits are yet to come, Rubio told reporters. As tensions continue to rise across the Middle East, the destruction of Iran's naval fleet has dramatically shifted the balance of power in the region. For Iran, the loss is historic. For the United States, it is a demonstration of modern military power and strategic planning. And for the rest of the world, it is another reminder that conflicts in this region can reshape global politics, energy markets, and international security in a matter of hours. What happens next may determine whether this confrontation escalates into a much larger regional war, or whether diplomacy can still prevent further devastation. For now, the waters of the Gulf of Oman are eerily quiet, where just days ago an entire fleet once stood ready for battle. But the destruction of Iran's naval fleet is only one chapter in a much larger and more dangerous story that is now unfolding across the Middle East. Operation devastated Iran's ships in the Gulf of Oman. The ripple effects of those strikes are spreading rapidly across the region. Military analysts say Iran's leadership now faces a difficult decision: escalate the conflict further or attempt to regroup after suffering one of the worst military losses in its modern history. In Tehran, officials have condemned the attacks and vowed that retaliation will continue. Iranian state media has broadcast statements promising that the country will not remain silent while its military infrastructure is targeted. Leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps warned that the conflict could expand beyond naval operations and move into other domains. One of the biggest concerns for global leaders right now is the possibility of attacks through Iran's network of regional allies and proxy groups. Across the Middle East, groups aligned with Iran have already begun signaling their involvement. The Houthis in Yemen, for example, have previously launched missiles and drones toward shipping lanes and military installations in the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon also possesses a large arsenal of rockets capable of reaching deep into Israeli territory. If those groups become more heavily involved, the conflict could quickly spread far beyond Iran and Israel. Meanwhile, the United States has continued reinforcing its military presence in the region. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and advanced fighter jets have been deployed to strategic locations across the Persian Gulf and nearby waters. These forces are intended not only to defend U.S. bases, but also to deter further escalation. Military experts say the message being sent is clear: any additional attack on American forces or allies will be met with overwhelming force. However, there is another dimension to this conflict that goes beyond missiles and warships. It is the economic battle that could impact the entire world. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most critical energy choke points on the planet. Every day, millions of barrels of oil pass through this narrow stretch of water connecting the Persian Gulf to the global market. If that route were to be closed or heavily disrupted, energy prices around the world could surge dramatically. Oil markets have already shown signs of nervousness, with prices fluctuating as traders react to each new development. Some vessels have begun avoiding the region entirely, while others are traveling in convoys under naval protection. Insurance costs for ships traveling through the strait have skyrocketed, adding further pressure to global trade. For countries heavily dependent on imported energy, the situation is especially concerning. China, India, and many European nations rely on oil shipments that pass directly through the Strait of Hormuz. Any long-term disruption could trigger economic consequences far beyond the Middle East. Despite these risks, the United States appears determined to keep the waterway open. American officials have repeatedly stated that freedom of navigation in the region is non-negotiable. That goal may explain why the U.S. focused so heavily on eliminating Iran's naval forces. Without a fleet capable of enforcing a blockade, Iran's ability to control the strait becomes significantly weaker. Still, Iran may attempt other strategies. Experts warn that naval mines, drone attacks, and small, fast boats could still be used to harass shipping traffic. Even limited attacks could create enough uncertainty to disrupt global supply chains. At the same time, diplomatic channels are quietly working behind the scenes. Several countries have reportedly begun pushing for emergency negotiations aimed at preventing the conflict from spiraling further out of control. European governments have called for restraint, while regional leaders are urging both sides to avoid actions that could ignite a broader war. For now, however, military operations remain the dominant focus. U.S. surveillance aircraft and drones continue monitoring Iranian military activity across the region. Satellites are tracking movements at naval bases, airfields, and missile launch sites. Meanwhile, Israeli forces remain on high alert, anticipating the possibility of additional missile attacks. In recent days, air defense systems across Israel have intercepted waves of drones and rockets launched from various directions. Civilians in several cities have been forced to take shelter as sirens echo through the night. The psychological impact of these attacks is immense. For people living in the region, the conflict is not just a geopolitical story. It is a daily reality marked by uncertainty, fear, and the constant sound of warning alarms. Every missile interception lights up the night sky. Every explosion reminds civilians that the situation could escalate at any moment. Back in Washington, policymakers are debating what the next phase of the conflict might look like. Some officials argue that the destruction of Iran's naval fleet has already achieved a major strategic objective. Others believe the United States must go further to eliminate additional military threats. What is certain is that the balance of power in the Persian Gulf has shifted dramatically in just a matter of days. A navy that once patrolled critical shipping lanes and projected influence across the region now lies largely in ruins. For Iran, rebuilding that capability would take years. For the United States and its allies, the challenge now is ensuring that the conflict does not spread into a wider regional war. History shows that conflicts in the Middle East can escalate rapidly and unpredictably. One retaliation sparks another response. And before long, a limited confrontation can grow into something far more dangerous. The coming weeks will be critical. Will Iran attempt to rebuild its naval presence and retaliate again? Will the United States launch further operations against Iranian military infrastructure? Or will diplomatic pressure eventually force both sides to step back from the brink? Answers to those questions could determine the future stability of the entire Middle East. For now, the aftermath of the 48-hour blitz remains visible from space: burning ships, damaged naval bases, and empty docks where warships once stood ready. It is a powerful reminder that modern warfare moves at extraordinary speed. And in just 2 days, the course of an entire conflict can change. As the smoke clears over the naval bases of Bandar Abbas and Chabahar, the deeper consequences of this dramatic escalation are beginning to unfold. What initially looked like a rapid military exchange has now turned into a strategic turning point that could reshape the balance of power across the entire Middle East. For Iran's leadership, the destruction of its naval fleet represents more than just a military loss. It strikes directly at the country's ability to project power beyond its borders. For years, Iran invested heavily in an asymmetric naval strategy designed specifically to counter the overwhelming technological superiority of the United States. Instead of trying to match American aircraft carriers and destroyers ship for ship, Iran focused on smaller, faster vessels capable of swarm attacks. These fast attack boats were designed to rush toward larger enemy vessels, launch missiles or torpedoes, and retreat quickly before being targeted. In theory, the strategy could overwhelm even the most advanced warships. But the strategy depended on one key assumption: that American ships would enter the narrow waterways where those boats could operate effectively. That assumption never materialized. Instead of sending large naval formations into the Strait of Hormuz, the United States relied on long-range weapons and stealth aircraft to strike Iranian assets from a distance. By the time Iranian commanders realized what was happening, their ships were already under attack. Many were destroyed before they ever had a chance to leave port. Military analysts say this moment highlights a larger trend in modern warfare. Distance is becoming the ultimate advantage. Cruise missiles launched from hundreds of miles away can now strike targets with extraordinary precision. Combined with real-time satellite intelligence and drone surveillance, these weapons allow militaries to eliminate threats before a traditional battle even begins. For Iran, adapting to this new reality will be extremely difficult. Sanctions have limited its ability to modernize its military equipment. Many of the aircraft still used by the Iranian Air Force date back to the era of the Shah in the 1970s, and naval modernization has faced similar challenges. While Iran has invested heavily in missile and drone technology, building and maintaining a modern navy requires resources and international access that Iran currently lacks. That weakness has now been exposed. However, the conflict is far from over. Iran still possesses one of the largest missile arsenals in the region, along with an extensive network of allied forces across the Middle East. These groups could continue launching attacks against American and Israeli targets in the coming weeks. Cyber warfare is another arena where tensions could escalate. Both Iran and the United States have sophisticated cyber capabilities capable of targeting critical infrastructure, financial systems, and communications networks. A cyber attack on oil facilities, shipping systems, or power grids could create disruptions that ripple far beyond the battlefield. Meanwhile, global diplomatic pressure is growing. Leaders from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are increasingly concerned that the conflict could spiral into a broader regional war. Behind closed doors, diplomats are reportedly working to establish communication channels that could reduce tensions. Some countries are pushing for emergency negotiations, while others are calling for international mediation. But achieving any form of agreement may prove difficult. Trust between the United States and Iran has been deeply strained for decades. Previous attempts at diplomacy have often collapsed under the weight of political disagreements, sanctions, and security concerns. At the same time, domestic pressures inside both countries make compromise politically risky. In Iran, hardline factions within the government may push for stronger retaliation to demonstrate resilience. In the United States, policymakers face pressure to respond forcefully to any attack on American forces or allies. Each side feels compelled to respond to the other, raising the risk that a limited conflict could expand into a much larger confrontation. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens across the region are watching events unfold with growing anxiety. In Gulf countries, people are closely monitoring the situation as governments strengthen security measures around ports, airports, and energy facilities. Businesses that depend on international shipping are preparing contingency plans in case trade routes become unstable. Even far beyond the Middle East, the effects are being felt. Energy markets remain highly sensitive to any disruption in the Persian Gulf. Investors are watching every development carefully, knowing that a single attack on shipping infrastructure could cause oil prices to surge dramatically. Global supply chains, already strained by years of geopolitical tension, could face additional shocks if the conflict continues. Yet despite all the uncertainty, one fact remains clear. The events of the past 48 hours have already rewritten the strategic landscape of the region. Iran's naval doctrine, developed over decades to counter American power, was dismantled in just 2 days of intense strikes. The Gulf of Oman, once crowded with Iranian vessels, now appears eerily quiet. And the message sent by the United States has been unmistakable. Any attempt to challenge its military presence in the region will be met with overwhelming force. Whether that message leads to de-escalation or further confrontation remains to be seen. History has shown that conflicts like this rarely end quickly. Often they evolve through unpredictable stages as both sides adjust their strategies and reassess their capabilities. For now, the world continues to watch closely. Every satellite image, every radar signal, and every official statement is analyzed for clues about what might happen next. Because in modern warfare, events can move faster than diplomacy, and sometimes the next turning point can arrive without warning. What began as a sudden escalation has now become one of the most closely watched military confrontations in the world. The coming days will determine whether this crisis fades into a tense standoff or ignites into a much larger war that could reshape the future of the Middle East. And as the smoke slowly clears over the waters of the Gulf of Oman, one thing has become painfully clear. The balance of power in this region has changed in a matter of hours. An entire naval force that took decades to build was crippled in less than 2 days. Ships that once patrolled vital trade routes now lie damaged or destroyed, and naval bases that once buzzed with activity are now covered in smoke and silence. But the real question isn't just what happened over the last 48 hours. The real question is what happens next. Will Iran attempt to retaliate with missiles, drones, or cyber attacks? Will the United States launch even larger strikes if tensions continue to rise? And could this confrontation pull more countries into a conflict that spreads across the entire Middle East? It does. The stakes are enormous. Global oil supplies, international shipping routes, and the stability of the region all hang in the balance. For millions of people living across the Middle East, this isn't just geopolitics or military strategy. It's a daily reality filled with uncertainty, tension, and the constant fear of escalation. The coming days could determine whether the world moves toward diplomacy, and if history has taught us anything, it's that moments like this can reshape global power in ways few people expect. Stay tuned as we continue to follow this developing story and break down the latest updates from the region. If you found this analysis helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next update. Because in times like these, understanding what's happening in the world has never been more important.